Okay.
Okay.
So I'm ready, Jonathan.
Tell me one thing persons in United States used to do, and here in Mexico, the people don't
Don't do it. But in the United States that they used to do. In other words, in the past, and not currently. Something that they
Well, we are taking about like currently like things that you make daily, like habits.
right. Things that you do daily in the United States that they don't do in Mexico. Well, first of all, I have two thoughts about it. The first thought is necessarily this requires like a generalization, right? Because everybody is a little different. So everybody does things a little differently. But what in the United States do they do? I'm not sure there's so much differences, frankly. Really, I don't think there's so much differences as to what people do. Maybe in California where I used to live, they do a lot more sports. So, but of course people do sports here in Mexico too. But yeah, maybe that's what the big difference you find in California compared to most of Mexico that I know. A lot more sports. That would be one idea I have. What else might they do in the United States? They don't do too much in Mexico. Because I think most people now in Mexico, you see things and it's quite similar to the US. People use electronics. People go to the mall. I got my haircut yesterday. People go to the mall. That's similar. Maybe I think actually sports is maybe the most big difference, and especially there's some Americans and quite a few who do more like extreme sports. So like climbing up the faces of mountains, jumping out of planes. Maybe that's more something that more you find more Americans than Mexicans. That's my idea. That's a long answer to your question, but hopefully Jonathan, that is helpful.
What about the,
It's Victor, right?
Yes.
Yes.
What about the eating habits?
Mm.
Like,
That's a difference. If you're asking what's the difference?
what's the difference?
Sure. That's actually a very good question because I think eating habits are quite different in the US because not just the time, but I think in Mexico I see people eat a lot more processed foods, packaged processed foods, lots and lots of packaged processed foods. I think more than in the US. It's a generalization because of course people in the United States also eat. I think it's a generalization. I also think, of course, you eat lunch usually later. It's very typical in the US to eat at 12 o'clock and eat very quickly, especially like at work. People eat very quickly, 30 minutes lunch, and then go back to work. So I'd say that's definitely more of a difference.
I'm here to lunch is
2 o'clock. Yeah, maybe 3 o'clock. Yeah, that's a big difference.
And the lunch is kind of bigger meal. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
For Mexico.
Yeah, that's for sure. And in the United States, the dinner is more the bigger meal. And people try to get together like families to eat dinners together. Try to. Right, so I think, I don't know, probably Mexico too. Is that what you say? Do people usually eat dinner together, families, or not so much?
Not so much. Not so much. Well,
Your experience.
my experience.
Yeah.
I think like holidays
After the holidays.
like Independence Day,
Christmas.
Christmas,
Yeah.
New Year. Do you like the Mexican food?
I love Mexican food.
Yeah.
I love food and especially Mexican food. I'd say it's like my favorite cuisine actually. And maybe not so much Yucatecan cuisine, but
In general.
in general, I love food, oaxaca, moles.
Oh,
Yes.
I like barbecue, barbacoa, o tacos, los tacos de, ¿cómo se dice? De res, pero hay un tipo, arrachera, por ejemplo, o bistec or arrachera.
For chili.
Yeah, pork chops, yeah. So I really like Mexican food. And on the beaches, like the seafood style,
oh,
ceviches, all that. That's very different than the US, for sure. But even in Southern California or San Diego, where I lived for many years, like about 30% of the population is like connected to Mexico, like immigrants, Latinos, and so and even there the food is not the same. If you go to Tijuana, it's
Totally different.
it's quite different, quite different. The experience, the way,
Flavors.
the textures. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, actually. The ingredients. Yes,
Yeah.
also the ingredients change.
Mhm.
Right. What about when you're meeting someone? Like, how do you greet it?
How do you greet? Oh, that's a good question because that's very different in Mexico, I would say. And so, can I ask what your mother's name is by chance?
It's my
No, Jonathan. And your mother's name?
it's Nancy.
Nancy. Mucho gusto, Nancy.
Mucho gusto.
Sí, so entonces, that's a big difference. And I think that's what you do in Mexico much better than in the United States. What I mean by that, when you meet somebody and you know somebody, like here, you usually shake their hand well, you give them a hug,
Yes.
right? And if it's a girl, you give them a kiss on the cheek, like a hello, goodbye. So it's very clear, when you meet somebody, you know when you say hi, of course, and you know when you say bye, right? There's a clear way to say hello when you come and goodbye.
When we're trying to express the moment, like, hey, like this, saying, hey, can we make you this?
Yeah.
It was kind of weird, actually.
No. I think it's actually quite good for you to do this. That's how you learn. To give you some idea, I met the chief economist of the World Bank. Pretty big deal. Here in Mérida, just by going up on the street and asking them, oh, what are you doing? Looks like you're tourists. Because he's from India. He's originally from India.
Okay.
My wife is Indian. So my daughters were with us. So here in Mérida, he was here with his family and his friend, who is the executive director of the International Monetary Fund. And I thought to myself, the only reason we got to meet these guys was because we went up to the street and said, hey, hello, how are you doing? And they came over as our guests. So, but that in the United States, back to the question of saying hello and greeting people, Americans are very awkward, even amongst their friends, because there's no clear way of saying goodbye usually. You don't give a hug usually. You don't if it's a girl and a guy, you don't give a kiss on the cheek. Usually, people aren't used to doing that, so it's very awkward. You know what I mean by awkward? It's not. It doesn't feel normal, and extraño, de confusión. Yeah, esa es la gran diferencia. And that's what I think is. That's actually something we in America should try to adopt, something like this, way you have a very great way of meeting, saying hello, and saying goodbye. Yeah. No more questions? So I have a question for you, Jonathan. How did you get your name? How did you get your name? Jonathan doesn't sound very Mexican.
Because my mother, like, I don't know the story, but she told me that my mother liked the name too,
Right?
so they,
Jonathan. It's a nice name, but not very common in Mexico.
yes, I know.
And you were born where, Jonathan?
Yes,
In Mérida. Ah, okay. Yucateco, 100%.
yes, and my mom is from Mexico.
Ah, ok. Mucho gusto, Nancy. Una pregunta para ustedes. Se nota la diferencia el acento de gente de Yucatán, ¿no? Y cómo hablan. Se nota que es muy diferente, ¿no? ¿Y cuáles son las diferencias principales? Cómo hablan aquí, porque muchas veces pronuncian N como M.
Ah, sí.
Yucatán.
Como por ejemplo, en lugar de decir jabón, dicen jabón.
Jabón. Yucatán. Yucatán. ¿No?
Sí.
También habla con un acento algo así. A veces hablan cómo está en el día, ¿no? ¿Cómo anda su día? Es-
¿Qué haces, Víctor?
¿Qué haces, Víctor? ¿Cómo andas tu día, Víctor? ¿No? Hablan algo diferente. ¿Por qué es así?
No sé.
Es, bueno, lo que yo he investigado un poco es por las raíces que hay aquí en la ciudad.
Ajá.
Que se ha adoptado también un poco del español de España,
Ujú.
tanto con la combinación del español que la gente adoptó de los pueblos.
Ujú.
Entonces hubo una modificación en la entonación y es por eso que cambia la pronunciación.
Yo pienso que fue de por sí por la lengua maya, que es muy así, o sea,
La lengua maya tiene
como
una
que-
forma de hablarse
ajá,
más
acentuada.
acentuada.
Escuche cómo está cantando.
Exactamente.
¿Cómo está cantando? Porque a mí me encanta cómo hablan aquí en Mérida. Es distinto.
Es distinto a
Por-
otros estados.
Because in the United States,